Today I want to record a difficult video to do, especially because I'm going to talk about topics that I think are not easy to put into words. I'm going to talk about AI and why I think there is a loss of freshness from earlier versions, V3 from Midjourney all the way to V5. And I'm going to try and use simple examples to get there. This is my opinion on it. I would love to hear your thoughts, other experiments that you have done. I understand there are lots of problems with Midjourney and all the databases and all of that. I'm just doing some experiments to understand this beast called AI art and trying to bring a little bit of insight and why I think artists are going to still be indispensable going forward and essential for quality. If you look at this image on your screen, this is a V3 of flowers, watercolor flowers painted by John Singer Sargent. It's very interesting to see the looseness of a lot of the details, suggestion, as well as shapes, interesting colors and all of that. And I think overall later it was losing a little bit of that. So let's look at some examples. Let's jump right in. So more examples of flowers. It's interesting that even as I asked for a more watercolor approach, it went more into oil painting kind of style, but very fresh, very interesting composition, very interesting suggestion. And it's nice that it comes very rough, and when you ask to upres, it brings a lot of this variations of colors internally, as well as almost like brush strokes here and there, as well as connection of shapes, almost as a watercolor in this case. So very interesting and really fresh. We can see some more details in here. Going forward to V4, as I said, it lost a little bit of the freshness and went into a more detailed and more descriptive approach instead of a suggestive approach. If we look at this compared to what we saw, there is way more description in all the shapes and forms, and even like the watercolor kind of thing that it's trying to make here, it's more rough and a little amateur if you think of the use of watercolor as a whole. Like this, there is no control in here, as well as on those edges and all of that. There are some interesting points, light source and light feel overall, but there is a lot of roughness overall. And V5 is even worse. It's almost like a Bob Rossi kind of way of doing watercolor. Like if you buy a book, How to Paint Flowers in Watercolor, it probably will have something like this. So I think it went all the way to descriptive and gathering a lot of information from this kind of sources. It's interesting that it has a lot of saving light areas, as you would do in a watercolor approach, but it becomes a little too amateurish, in my opinion, of what that could be overall. Would love to hear your thoughts. As I said, let's compare one next to the other. There is a lot more freshness on this one than the other. And here, some other examples, interesting examples from V3. So this is Sargent, so it even has some faces mashed up in there. It's weird, but it's interesting on its own. So I would love to see paint over something like this more than the descriptive final results that we see. Next, we're gonna look at architecture drawings by John Singer Sargent. What would be something like that? There is also, once again, in the V3, a lot of freshness and looseness. If we look the detailed versions of the drawings, a lot of weird, chaotic, more organic approach to architecture, as it's normal to see in this kind of V3 result. but a lot of freshness, great composition, line weight going all the way to the back from the front, figures for scale, and a lot of this kind of stuff that really brings a very interesting image, at least in my opinion. If we go to V4, there's a great loss of quality here. It's way more descriptive, but using a lot of like strong blacks, trying to convey what a drawing would look like. So I think V4 is where it got really weird, and very rough. Now when you get to V5, it gets better. So it's a little bit of the description from V4, with more subtle approaches to drawing, almost as we saw in V3, but still very technical instead of artistic. It's great on that side. If you have technical drawings, this would be better if you look at that side. Here is the same. So interesting results, but even on the line weight, it seems a little amateurish compared to what we saw. If we put both the images that I really enjoyed side to side, so one from V3 and one from V5, they both have some kind of value. This is weird architecture construction, but I'm not gonna even get into architecture construction and the history of architecture, because this is weird on its own. But this has a lot of freshness. At least that's what I think. I would love to hear your thoughts. The next example we're gonna see is an ancient temple by David Roberts. So David Roberts is a very technical, very literal, very straightforward kind of approach to drawing. So V5 will have great results, getting way closer to David Roberts, but I see also, again, a lot of freshness in this kind of results, and a lot of organized chaos in terms of readability. So very, very interesting. If we get to V4 again, we go back to the blacks and very rough kind of details. So I really don't like this. Very all over the place, amateurish. But when we get to V5, there's definitely description, but also quality. Very interesting values, getting super close to what David Roberts' work would look like. If we compare them side by side, V3 to V5, I love this composition in terms of the distribution of weights and values, as well as atmospheric perspective and all of that. But I love as well the combination of different architectures here. We would need an artist that understands architecture to try and break down and reverse engineer what's here. So if we want to build like a whole village with this temple on it, we understand what kind of a different architecture it's combining to get to this point, so that we can replicate it all over. That's also a very big importance of having a concept designer helping projects, even if we do use AI at some point to create some variations. So looking at David Roberts himself, you can see that it's very descriptive, but also very interesting compositions and distribution of weights and distribution of details. It's almost like a technical drawing to some extent. I love how he went to some places in his time, so we can have almost a picture of what they look like. I'm definitely gonna do a lot of videos on those topics going forward, so we can really learn from this master. The next one, we're gonna look at some examples. What would be a drawing of a man and an elephant by Heinrich Kley. Heinrich Kley is an artist that really inspired the old days of Disney work. So very loose with a lot of different interesting shapes. And here's where I think V3, it has elephant kind of things in there, as well as a person to some extent in terms of shapes and textures and all of that. But it has a freshness. It's not going to be descriptive, and once again, but it has some freshness to it. We can definitely draw over it or paint over it and use some of those shapes to get to interesting results if we do complete them. So some more here. It's interesting, the distribution of weights of values, light and dark, and those shapes, and what it's bringing to the table here. Very fresh in my opinion, but hard to see and hard to describe. If we look at V4, once again, a complete mess, weird mixture of a lot of things here, very amateurish, but V5 gets to the descriptive kind of method. So if we look at this, there is no Heinrich Kley here, but it's an elephant with a person. So it goes that route instead of going to what we talked about in terms of the reference that we're using. And Heinrich Kley, by the way, is public domain, so it would potentially go into a safe, as we could say, AI approach. So this, once again, elephant, man, but no dynamic pose. If we do ask it to bring a dynamic pose by Heinrich Kley, it gets closer, but it loses the elephant. So it's interesting, but I love the shapes, so that would be an interesting start of a conversation for a drawing. Next, this is the final, the second to last that we're going to see. Some etchings by Zorn. We're going to see some examples by Zorn himself, but we can see a lot of freshness and artistic approach here. It's not close to the etchings by himself, by Zorn, especially on the theme. His etchings are more of persons or people and so on, but very interesting details and suggestive. I would love to frame this and have on my room. I think that would be great. If we go to V4 again, a mess. So it's interesting that it tried to get better, but it got worse in the first moment. It's very descriptive once again, so some people might enjoy it, but it loses a lot of the artistic freshness. V5, it gets a little better, but it goes to a very photographic kind of approach. Cross-hatching, yes, but very photographic and not very suggestive. So we have a lot of description. It's almost like a filter over a photograph. So that's one of my big issues with the way AI is going in some of this stuff, or it either goes anime or it goes like photorealistic, as I feel. There's no midway for quality. So the artistic approach that we saw before, like this or even this, very suggestive on V3, we lost a lot of that. We go to a photographic way and lose the freshness, as we saw in all examples before. And just for your curiosity, if you don't know, this is Zorn etching. So yeah, there's no comparison. There's nothing to say to add here. So last but not least, I did a study on Monet. So this is V3. Once again, very interesting how it really gets a freshness in there, but weird colors and all. V4 goes all the way to blacks once again. So very not Monet. It goes to the bridge and water lilies and all of that. Very cliche Monet, but it uses a lot of blacks that impressionists wouldn't use. When we get to this point, it gets better. I think this is one of the best scenes. I didn't up-res this one because I wanted to see less water lilies / bridge and see a little bit of what it would bring on a different sense. So I enjoyed this one. I like the light feel. It's not impressionism, as we'll see an example from Monet himself, but there are lots of interesting things here, a lot of interesting reflections. I think brush strokes are all over the place, so not using a direction, as well as values. You have a lot of contrasts of values here as well as in here. It's an interesting image, but I think it loses a lot of the freshness of what a Monet could be, and what a V3 brought to the table. It's different. It brought like a little bit of weirdness as well in terms of colors, but it brings a freshness as well as a value range that is interesting, in that we see in a final like painting by Monet. This is a real Monet. I don't know how close to the colors it is, but it's interesting to see the comparison of suggestion that I feel V3 had a lot of similarities to this noise and this kind of impressionistic approach, as I'm gonna bring on other videos from other experiments that I did. I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. I did a video on learning art during this era of AI art, and why it's important really to go beyond fundamentals of painting and understand your architecture, understand the world around us and design, and how can we use all of this, including those tools, if we do get to a point where copyright makes sense and we can use AI as a tool. We will need a lot of artistic, the critical eye for quality, as well as the skills to make changes here and there, and to control more the process, so we can get to fresh, interesting approach in the end. I really do believe that artists are going to be essential on getting to great results that are not gonna look generic. I see a lot of results from people all around, and it gets back to that very realistic kind of approach that I really feel that we as humanity lose a lot from just concentrating on that and not looking more artistically to everything as we could. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, you probably will enjoy my other video on learning. I'll link that here right now. And I really hope to see you on other videos down the line. Have a great one.